shot Barkley refused to take back. Charles Barkley didn't just fire back at Kendrick Perkins, he sent a warning shot through the entire NBA media world. One sentence from Perkins started it, one live television rant from Barkley turned it into a full-blown war. And now, with Inside the NBA walking straight into ESPN's building, the same network where Perkins built his second career, the question is no longer whether this beef is real. The question is what happens when two of the loudest voices in basketball are forced to share the same air. This all began when Perkins accused Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal of not really watching basketball. To most fans, that may have sounded like a normal TV argument, but to Barkley, it was personal. You can call him wrong, you can call his takes old school, you can say he missed on the Knicks, the Lakers, or any playoff prediction he has ever made, but telling Charles Barkley he does not watch the game, that hit the one place he was never going to ignore his pride. Barkley has spent decades building a reputation as the most unpredictable, unfiltered, brutally honest voice in NBA television. Perkins, meanwhile, has spent his ESPN career doing the same thing from the other side. Loud takes, strong opinions, no fear of backlash. That is why this was never just about the Knicks, the Lakers, LeBron, Luka, or the MVP race. This was about status, respect, territory. And when Barkley called Perkins out on national television, when he blasted ESPN's obsession with the Lakers and said some analysts had nothing else to talk about, the entire NBA world stopped scrolling because suddenly this was bigger than one insult. It was TNT culture colliding with ESPN culture. It was the old king walking into a new kingdom and refusing to bow. But here is the twist. Before this feud could explode inside ESPN's own walls, someone stepped in. A wife, a respected media legend, and one private message may have stopped one of the biggest NBA media wars before it fully detonated. So tell me, where are you watching from right now? If you think Barkley crossed the line, comment 1. If you think Perkins brought this on himself, comment 2. And if you love NBA drama, make sure you subscribe, because this story is only getting started. The accusation that started everything. Kendrick Perkins probably thought he was just making another strong TV point. That is what ESPN pays him to do. Say it loud, say it direct, and make the audience react. But when he said Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal did not really watch basketball, he stepped into a different kind of fire. Because to Barkley, that was not a basketball take. That was an attack on his entire career. For decades, Barkley has built his television identity on one thing. He says what he believes, whether fans like it or not. He has been wrong before. He has laughed at himself before. He has missed predictions, mocked teams that proved him wrong, and still walked back onto the set the next night with the same confidence. But there is one thing he has always claimed with pride: he watches the game. So when Perkins suggested that Barkley and Shaq were dismissing the Knicks without actually paying attention, Barkley heard something much deeper. He heard Perkins saying he was lazy. He heard Perkins saying the most famous studio show in NBA history was coasting on reputation. And for a man like Barkley, that was never going to slide. The Knicks were only the surface of the argument. Perkins believed New York deserved more respect as a real Eastern Conference threat. Barkley and Shaq were not buying it. That could have stayed as a normal debate, but Perkins turned it into a question of effort. And once effort became the issue, the whole conversation changed. Suddenly, this was not about New York. It was about credibility. Perkins had spent years trying to prove he belonged on national television. Barkley had spent decades proving he owned that space. One man was trying to climb higher. The other was refusing to be pushed off the mountain. And the moment Perkins challenged Barkley's work ethic, the feud stopped being professional and became personal. When TNT turned the beef into a show, Barkley did not respond quietly. That was never his style. Instead, TNT turned Kendrick Perkins into a punchline in front of the entire NBA audience. During a live segment on Inside the NBA, a punching bag appeared with Perkins' face attached to it. Barkley and Shaq put on gloves, started throwing shots, and the whole thing instantly became viral. It was funny to some people, petty to others. But no matter how fans reacted, one thing was clear. TNT was sending a message. They were not treating Perkins like an equal rival. They were treating him like a loud interruption. Like a man who had wandered into their territory and needed to be reminded who controlled the room. Barkley and Shaq were not just disagreeing with him. They were clowning him. That image mattered. Perkins' face on the bag, Barkley swinging, Shaq laughing. The crew enjoying the moment. It was television built for reaction, and it worked. Clips spread fast, fans picked sides, and suddenly, the beef had a visual symbol. But for Perkins, that moment could not have felt harmless. This was a former NBA champion, a man who had fought for every role he ever had, now being reduced to a joke by two Hall of Fame giants on the most respected basketball show in America. That is why the situation grew teeth, because once someone becomes the joke, they either laugh along or fight back. Perkins chose the second option. He kept talking, he kept defending his opinions, he kept showing up on ESPN as if Barkley had not embarrassed him at all. And that may have irritated Barkley even more. Perkins did not disappear. He did not apologize. He did not shrink. Instead, he became louder, more visible, and more determined to prove that ESPN's voice could stand across from TNT's throne. Perkins refused to be treated like a nobody. The easy version of this story is that Barkley is the legend and Perkins is just the loud analyst who got roasted. But that version misses what makes the feud so interesting. Kendrick Perkins was never supposed to become one of the most talked about voices in NBA media. As a player, he was not a superstar. He was not a highlight machine. He was not the guy selling jerseys or carrying franchises. He was the hard screen, the defensive body, the tough presence in the paint. He won a championship with Boston, but he built his career doing the work most fans barely noticed. That is why his media rise mattered. When Perkins joined ESPN, he did not walk in with Barkley's fame or Shaq's charisma. He had to earn attention the modern way through strong takes, loud debates, and a willingness to get criticized. And whether people loved him or hated him, they reacted to him. That reaction made him valuable. ESPN understood that. Perkins fit perfectly into the debate-driven machine. First Take, NBA Today, Get Up, SportsCenter. These shows need voices that create conversation. Perkins became one of those voices. He was polarizing, but polarizing is profitable. So when Barkley and Shaq mocked him, Perkins was not just defending his pride, he was defending the career he had built after basketball. He was saying in his own way, "You may not respect how I got here, but I am here." That is the real tension. Barkley came from an era where television greatness was built on chemistry, humor, and authenticity. Perkins came from an era where survival depends on attention, argument, and viral moments. One man represents the old empire. The other represents the new machine, and neither one was willing to back down. The Lakers' obsession that made Barkley snap. By the time Luka Doncic landed in Los Angeles, the NBA media machine had already found its favorite story. The Lakers were back. LeBron had another superstar. Hollywood had another headline. And ESPN leaned into it with everything it had. Every show, every debate, every morning segment seemed to circle back to the same question: were the Lakers suddenly the team that could save the NBA season? For Kendrick Perkins, the answer sounded close to yes. He saw Luka next to LeBron and believed Los Angeles had become a real threat. He was not alone. Plenty of voices were caught up in the same excitement. The trade was massive. The star power was impossible to ignore. The Lakers were not just a basketball team anymore. They were content, ratings, legacy, drama, and debate all rolled into one. But Barkley saw something different. He looked past the purple and gold noise and saw better teams being ignored. Oklahoma City was building something terrifying. Cleveland was playing elite basketball. Other teams were doing the work every night without the same national spot. And to Barkley, that was the problem. The NBA had real stories everywhere, but the coverage kept getting dragged back to Los Angeles. That frustration had been building for years. Barkley had long criticized what he viewed as ESPN's habit of chasing the biggest names instead of the best basketball. LeBron, Lakers, Jordan debates, legacy conversations. The same topics recycled again and again, while teams actually dominating the season had to fight for attention. So when Perkins pushed the Lakers narrative too far, Barkley finally exploded. He did not just disagree, he attacked the whole system behind the take. He said the people leaning on those same easy topics had no real ability to discuss anything else. And then he put Perkins directly in the line of fire. That was the moment the feud changed again. It was no longer just Perkins versus Barkley. It became Barkley versus ESPN's entire style of NBA covering. Stephen A. Smith steps into the fire. Once Barkley started swinging at ESPN, there was no way Stephen A. Smith was going to stay silent. Stephen A. is not just another ESPN personality. He is the face of the network's debate empire. He understands better than anyone how sports television works now. Strong opinions create clips. Clips create conversation. Conversation creates power. So when Barkley criticized ESPN's coverage and called out Perkins, Stephen A. knew this was not just a side argument. This was someone from the outside walking toward ESPN's front door and criticizing the furniture before he even moved in. His response carried a warning. He basically told Barkley to stop hiding behind broad shots and attach names to his criticism. And then he made the message even sharper. Once Barkley arrived at ESPN, there would be people waiting to call him a fool too. That line mattered, because Stephen A. was not only defending Perkins, he was defending the house. ESPN may have wanted inside the NBA's magic, but Stephen A. was making it clear that Barkley was not walking into an empty building. ESPN already had stars. It already had voices. It already had people who knew how to command attention. That created the bigger question. What happens when the most powerful personality in TNT history enters the same ecosystem as the most powerful personality at ESPN? Barkley built his brand by being fearless. Stephen A. built his brand the same way. Perkins survived by refusing to back down. Put all three under one media roof, and suddenly the drama becomes bigger than basketball. The audience could feel it. This was not normal TV criticism. This was a battle for tone, territory, and control. ESPN wanted Barkley's authenticity, but Barkley did not want ESPN changing him. Perkins wanted respect, but Barkley was treating him like a symbol of everything he hated about modern debate shows. And Stephen A. knew one thing clearly: if this tension was not handled, ESPN's new NBA era could become must-watch television for all the wrong reasons. Two men fighting for different kinds of respect. The reason this feud hit so hard is because both men believed they were defending something real. Barkley was defending legacy. He had spent decades helping turn Inside the NBA into the gold standard of sports television. That show was not loved because it followed a perfect script. It was loved because it felt alive. Ernie Johnson kept the room balanced. Kenny Smith brought championship insight. Shaq brought star power and humor. Barkley brought danger. You never knew what he would say, and that made people watch. To Barkley, that freedom was sacred. So as Inside the NBA prepared to move from TNT's world into ESPN's world, Barkley did not want anyone thinking he would become quieter, safer, or more corporate. Every shot he took at ESPN was also a message: I am not changing. Perkins, on the other hand, was defending survival. He did not have Barkley's Hall of Fame broadcasting resume. He did not have Shaq's global fame. He did not have Stephen A's empire. What he had was his voice, his confidence, and his willingness to take heat. ESPN gave him a platform, and he used it to become one of the most talked about NBA analysts in the country. That is why Barkley's insults could not simply be brushed off. When Barkley called him a fool, it was not just a joke. It was a threat to the respect Perkins had worked to earn. One man was protecting the throne, the other was protecting his seat at the table. And that is what made the conflict so emotional. Barkley looked at Perkins and saw the worst habits of modern sports media: loud takes, forced debate, Lakers obsession. Perkins looked at Barkley and saw an older legend who refused to respect the new voices shaping the conversation. But underneath all the noise, they were more similar than either side wanted to admit. Barkley became famous because he refused to sound like everyone else. Perkins became relevant because he refused to disappear into safe commentary. Barkley built a career by saying the uncomfortable thing. Perkins built a second career by saying the thing that made people react. The difference was not fearlessness. They both had that. The difference was where that fearlessness came from. Barkley's confidence came from accomplishment. He had already been an MVP, a Hall of Famer, and a central figure on the most beloved NBA studio show ever created. He could afford to be loud because his resume protected him. Perkins' confidence came from necessity. He had to be loud because if he blended in, he could be replaced. In that sense, every debate was a fight for space. That made the coming ESPN era even more complicated. If Barkley walked in and instantly became the dominant voice, what happened to Perkins? If Perkins pushed back too hard, would fans see him as brave or disrespectful? If Barkley softened his tone, would the audience feel like ESPN had already changed him? Every possible outcome carried risk. Both men had a point. Both men had ego. And both men were too proud to let the other define them. The rumor that made everything look even bigger. Then came the rumor. Social media started buzzing with claims that Kendrick Perkins was leaving ESPN. Some fans believed it instantly. Others celebrated before checking if it was true. That is how fast NBA media drama moves now. One post, one graphic, one viral rumor, and suddenly the entire internet is acting like a man's career has changed overnight. But the rumor caught fire for a reason. Perkins is polarizing. Some viewers respect him because he speaks with force and never hides from criticism. Others believe his takes are too extreme, too emotional, or too built for viral debate. So, when people saw claims that ESPN might be moving on from him, many did not question it. They wanted it to be true because it fit the version of Perkins they already believed. At the same time, Barkley's arrival made the rumor feel even more dramatic. Inside the NBA, coming to ESPN was not just a programming change. It was a power shift. Barkley, Shaq, Kenny, and Ernie were not ordinary additions. They were an institution. Their presence immediately raised the standard. Every ESPN NBA voice would now be compared to them. That included Perkins. Suddenly, fans were asking uncomfortable questions. Would ESPN still need Perkins the same way once Barkley was in the building? Would Barkley's presence make Perkins look smaller? Would the network lean more toward TNT's chemistry and less toward the loud debate format Perkins thrived in? Even if the rumor was false, the reaction revealed something important. The audience sensed a new hierarchy forming. Perkins had spent years building relevance at ESPN. Barkley was arriving with decades of credibility and a fan base that trusted him even when they disagreed with him. That kind of star power changes the temperature in every room, and the internet loves a power struggle. It does not matter whether the facts are fully clear at first. Fans see a possible shakeup, and they immediately start building their own version of the story. Some imagine Barkley walking into ESPN and pushing Perkins out of the spotlight. Others imagine Perkins standing his ground and forcing Barkley to respect him. Some even believed ESPN might use the tension on purpose because nothing drives attention like two strong personalities who may not fully like each other. That is the danger of modern NBA media. The story is no longer only what happens on television. The story is also what fans think is happening behind the scenes. A rumor can become a storyline before anyone confirms it. A fake post can create real pressure. A misleading headline can shape how millions of people interpret the next segment. For Perkins, that meant every appearance carried extra weight. If he looked quiet, people might say Barkley had already won. If he was too aggressive, they might say he felt threatened. If he praised Barkley, they might call it fear. If he challenged Barkley, they might call it jealousy. That is an impossible box to live in, but that is exactly the box social media built around him. And for Perkins, the real challenge was no longer just answering Barkley's insults. It was proving he still belonged in ESPN's future. The piece nobody saw coming. After all the insults, jokes, shots, and viral moments, the ending came from the most unexpected place: real life. Not a producer, not a network executive, not a dramatic on-air apology. It started with Perkins' wife, who looked at the whole situation and saw what many people outside the media bubble probably saw: two grown men letting TV arguments turn into something unnecessary. That perspective mattered, because sometimes the people closest to the noise are the last ones to realize how ridiculous it has become. Barkley and Perkins had both made their points. Barkley had defended his credibility. Perkins had defended his respect. The audience had picked sides. The clips had gone viral. But at some point, the beef had nowhere healthy left to go. So Perkins reached out to Michael Wilbon. That was the perfect person to call. Wilbon is respected across the basketball world. He is old school enough for Barkley to trust and connected enough to ESPN for Perkins to feel heard. He was not there to choose sides. He was there to remind both men that the NBA media world is too small for pointless personal wars. Wilbon put them in a group chat and opened the door for peace. The idea was simple: sit down, break bread, talk like men, and stop letting the feud define the future. Then Barkley responded in a way few people expected. He called Perkins Big Perk and said he was doing an outstanding job. That did not erase every insult. It did not mean Barkley suddenly agreed with every Lakers take or every ESPN segment, but it showed respect. And for Perkins, that was probably enough. The beef was never really about whether two analysts could disagree. Disagreement is the business. The real issue was respect. Once Barkley gave Perkins even a piece of that respect, the temperature dropped. But the piece was also strategic. ESPN did not need chaos before its new NBA era even began. Inside the NBA moving into the ESPN, ABC World was already one of the biggest shifts in sports television. The network needed excitement, not open hostility. It needed chemistry, not awkward tension. It needed Barkley to be Barkley, Perkins to be Perkins, and Stephen A. Smith to keep the energy high without the whole thing turning into a locker room feud. That is why Wilbon's role mattered so much. He understood the culture, he understood the egos, he understood that some conflicts cannot be solved by executives because they are not really business problems. They are respect problems. And respect problems have to be handled person to person. The most interesting part is that neither man had to completely surrender. Barkley did not have to take back every criticism. Perkins did not have to admit he was wrong. They just had to recognize that the other man had earned a place in the conversation. That is often how real peace works. It is not always a perfect apology. Sometimes it is simply two proud people deciding that continuing the fight costs more than ending it. Just like that, one of NBA media's loudest wars turned into a dinner conversation waiting to happen. What this feud really teaches the NBA world. In the end, the Barkley versus Perkins feud was never only about basketball. It was about pride. It was about identity. It was about what happens when two generations of sports media collide in front of millions of fans. Barkley represents the old school television giant: honest, unpredictable, funny, sometimes harsh, but impossible to ignore. Perkins represents the modern debate era, bold, emotional, viral, and willing to take the heat if it keeps him in the conversation. Neither man is perfect. Barkley can cross the line when his frustration turns personal. Perkins can push a take so hard that the message gets buried under the reaction. But both men understand something essential about sports television: silence does not move people. Passion does. The strategic lesson for ESPN is clear. If the network wants this new NBA era to work, it cannot simply collect big personalities and hope they fit together. Barkley, Shaq, Kenny, Ernie, Stephen A., Perkins, these are not background voices. These are brands. They need space, structure, and trust. The magic will come from tension, but only if that tension stays rooted in respect. The lesson for fans is just as important. Drama is entertaining, but behind every viral clip is a real person defending a real career. It is easy to laugh at the insult and forget the human being on the other side. Barkley and Perkins showed that conflict can create attention, but peace creates longevity. And maybe that is the best ending this story could have had. Two strong men argued. Two proud voices clashed. The internet turned it into war. But instead of letting ego destroy the relationship, they chose to step back, talk, and move forward. That is bigger than basketball. Because in sports, media, business, and life, respect does not mean you always agree. It means you know when to compete, when to listen, and when to sit down at the same table. If you think Barkley and Perkins can become great TV together, comment 1. If you think another clash is coming, comment 2. And if you enjoyed this NBA story, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video with another basketball fan who loves the drama behind the game.